Hello, my name's Mike Prager, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Avid Exchange. I'm really excited to be here today with Jennifer Elder, CEO of the Sustainable CFO, for our future-proofing of the Office of the CFO series. And excited to have Jennifer live from New Hampshire. Together, we're going to talk really about, the role of the CFO in today's workplace, the challenges over the last 12, 18 months related to the pandemic, and more importantly, how the finance teams and CFO is really preparing for the future. But before we kick things off, Jennifer, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey to becoming the CEO of the Sustainable CFO?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it, Mike. My journey to CFO was a little bit of a roundabout approach. Accounting is actually my second career. So my original degree was in school counseling, and discovered I couldn't support myself with that degree. So I thought if I could count my pennies, that might be a better career. That was the one that stuck. Started in public, then I taught at a community college for 7 years. Once I felt like I'd mastered that, then I decided, well, let's try the private side. So I started as a controller, moved my way up to CFO, and spent about 7 years in the housing industry, right before the housing bubble. So it's an interesting position to be in when you're the CFO and you have to lay yourself off. But that kind of goes with the challenges when you're looking out for the company's interest first. And then I had a couple more adventures as the CFO. And when the third company got sold, I decided the world was trying to tell me something. So it was time to step away from the CFO role. And now I help develop the necessary skills that a CFO needs that they never learned in their finance degree. And those are the skills that are so important for the future finance department.
Well, that's really interesting. Your journey is a little bit of kind of the reverse that I hear from lots of people who, kind of start off with a deep, kind of schooling degree in finance, and then they kind of, move out of that finance role to other roles in business disciplines, but you came at it from the opposite side and migrated into the finance role. So I think that's a pretty good indication of where your passion is. Well, let's start by maybe talking about what's occurred over the last 18 months with this thing called the pandemic, right? You're working with lots of CFOs. Maybe you could provide some insights in terms of your work over the last 18 months and really helping some of CFOs kind of navigate that journey.
Well, what we call it COVID or the pandemic, it's a 4-letter word for all of us now. It has required so many different skill sets and tested trial by fire so many CFOs. And that's the downside of it. On the positive side, it accelerated the future. Some people have said in the last 18 months, we have advanced the finance world and the tech world by 5 to 10 years. So there is a positive to it. But I think one of the benefits of this pandemic was organizations found out just how valuable their finance department is. That when push comes to shove, they can, in fact, adjust what they're doing. They know how to adjust controls and still keep things safe and moving forward and consistent. They know how to do scenario planning. And maybe that's something that they weren't given the opportunity to do. So I think a lot of finance people, CFOs, really found themselves stepping into the strategy role that they have been looking to embrace.
Yeah, that's really interesting because what we found at Avid Exchange is that the whole issue of business continuity planning, at least for us as a company and myself and our CFO, all our business continuity planning historically was around like weather, right? What happens if there's a hurricane in Charlotte, and how do we move say our payment processing to Salt Lake City, which is really our West Coast Operations Center, and vice versa between the different offices we have across the country. But I don't think preparing for a pandemic was really anybody's, kind of a list of different, scenarios to plan for, right? And so
and certainly not for 18, 19 months now. And, just when you thought it was safe and you could go back into the water, here comes the Delta variant, and everybody's having to adjust their business models again. And it's continual state of change, which is in some cases very difficult. In finance, we like consistency.
Yeah.
So it has been a struggle, and I think the Delta wave is really testing people's resilience, because we're tired now. So having to adjust one more time is like the gas is almost on empty, and we have to go up a really steep mountain.
Well, that's a pretty good metaphor. So speaking of kind of steep mountains, as we're kind of now, I'll say kind of transitioning. Maybe I'll take a little bit of a leap of faith here and say, we're kind of over the next 6 months going to be transitioning out of the pandemic. What are some of those mountains that the finance industry and CFOs in particular have to have to navigate? And then, maybe along with that, are there any, opportunities that you really see emerging, for finance teams and the CFO to take advantage of?
There are a couple of challenges that I think the finance department, as well as organizations as a whole, face. Number one is the burnout. People are tired and they are stressed, and it's popping out in inappropriate ways. So we have to keep our fingers on the pulse of our employees and pay a little bit more attention to mental health now. We hear about it every day when somebody loses it on an airplane. But I'm also hearing stories of people losing it at work over little things. And we're just that tired. So I think the CFO often, unless we have a CHR, the Chief Human Resources Officer, HR is under the CFO's role. And so they're having to pay a little bit more attention to employee wellness, the culture. In those hybrid environments, it's how do we maintain that culture when we can't just walk by somebody's office and say, how are you doing? I think another challenge is they've gotten a taste for being at the strategy table, and they like it. And here's the challenge and the opportunity at the same time, is when you take on the role of strategy, something has to go off your plate. Because that is strategic planning, strategic thinking is time consuming when it's done right. So the opportunity here is IT, software, RPA, AI. And I think there was, at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember hearing about Novartis saying they planned a 2-year rollout of Microsoft Teams. Then COVID hit. It took 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So suddenly these, those roadblocks of saying it's going to take too much time, too much effort, we can't do this. That roadblock is cleared now. They just have to make the time to look at what can be automated. And there are so many proven options out there for automating both AR, AP, customer service. And that starts to free up the time without, you don't lay off somebody when their job has been automated. You elevate their skill set, and that elevates into the strategy world and the business partnering world. And I think those two elements are what is going to make finance not the cost center CF no, but when finance can truly has the time to be a good business partner, they become a second engine. If you think of an organization as a train, sales is the engine. They are, that golden engine moving forward. And finance is often thought of as the caboose. But when they partner, now all of a sudden you can have a second engine at the back of the train. And how fast could the organization move then? Yeah,
I think that's really well said. And one of the things, certainly at AvidXchange, that challenge our, finance team and our FP&A teams all the time are, they need to have that growth mindset, and they have a big, lever to help us grow faster, and that's data and access to data. And how do we use, data that they can provide, to different, kind of the business units, across the AvidXchange, to, understand, trends and opportunities for us to, better serve customers, increase value proposition to customers, and actually grow faster. So I think you're absolutely right.
Big data is, everybody's now talking about big data. And some people would say, well, that's only Fortune 100 companies. No, even a sole proprietor has big data. It's just a matter of accessing it. Now, finance people typically love getting into the data. Now, the issue is, in finance, we speak number. We love looking at spreadsheets. We love analyzing the data, and numbers just pop out at us. But when you're business partnering, you can't just take that spreadsheet and hand it over to somebody and say, here. They're going to look at it and go,
right.
Oh, dear God, what is this? So really, the one more challenge for the finance department is, how can we translate those numbers so that they're meaningful and useful?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that, I'm a big believer in is, in a lot of ways, finance has to be a storyteller. So, right, they need to be able to take that data, but you're exactly right. The people in the business aren't finance people. So they need to take, the data and identify, okay, what are the, 1, 2, 3, key metrics, or maybe some of the leading metrics, rather than going with a spreadsheet, going with, a handful of numbers and telling, a story around those numbers for the business to understand, and then kind of helping the business create those strategies and how they can impact the numbers, right?
Yeah, the storytelling is so important. It's pre-pandemic, I used to fly 40 some odd weeks out of the year, and when I'd sit down next to somebody in the airplane, they'd say, what do you do? I'm a CPA. I work in finance, and they would often look at me and go, "You're good with numbers."
Yeah.
Good with math. And I'm thinking to myself, I add, I subtract. Multiply and divide, there's a calculator involved. But it's not so much that we're that good with math, it's that so much of the rest of the world is that bad at math and is fearful of numbers. But if you think about it, even a 6-month-old baby understands stories.
Yeah.
They can follow the story in a picture book. Well, we can take data and turn it into a story and a picture book. You don't have to present tables of numbers. You can present it in a visual format that not only understand instantly, but remember. And if you don't mind, I can share my 5-word summary.
All right, let's hear it.
Telling a story. So it starts with what? What is a number? It doesn't mean anything on its own. If I tell you your EBITDA was 1.24 million, that doesn't tell me anything. Right. The second 2 words are so what? Right. Put it in context. If your EBITDA is 1.2 million, now I need to know what was last year. Did we exceed last year by how much, or did we miss by how much? And then we often get there in our reports. It's the last 2 words that people miss, and that's really the story. Now what? So it's what is a number, so what's putting it in context, now what is what steps do we take as a result of this information? And that's where your data gets powerful for your business partners.
Absolutely. I think that's well said, and a bunch of nuggets I'm sure our listeners can take away and apply in their business. Maybe switching gears a little bit, Jennifer, let's talk about kind of innovation and some of the technologies that you indicated. What have you seen as sometimes what can be paralyzing for a CFO or a finance leader is like where to start, right? It's like I can do all these different things. There's all this different technology available to me. What do you suggest maybe is kind of some of the low-hanging fruit in terms of where, a CFO can start on their, efficiency journey, automation journey within their organization?
Well, a couple of things to think about. My dad always used to tell me that if you have to climb a mountain, break it down into molehills. It's the same distance, but you feel so much better along the way. So instead of looking at this huge finance of the future, data disruption project, find something simple. And for me, I think when we're approaching something that might be a little scary for us, adopting new software or AI or RPA requires that we let go. We can't control everything. So it does get a little scary. So I would recommend that a CFO looking to adopt new technologies is talk to people in your industry. You have a network. Find out where they started and find something simple. And you can do pilot projects. There's simple adoption of payments processing, simple adoption in AR, simple adoption with travel and expense reporting.
Yep.
So there are lots of different options, but I think finance people are not known for being on the bleeding edge. So finding somebody that you can talk to about their implementation will take some of the fear away, and you learn from their challenges.
Yeah, we've learned kind of the same thing, and certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, there's a big focus area over just bill payment, right? And how are we going to get paper checks cut, and when we're sending our AP team home, as an example, at AvidXchange, and we heard all kinds of crazy stories with prior to implementing AvidXchange, the CFOs were sending their AP team home with like pre-printed check stock and actually tabletop vaults to store the check stock in with especially these laser printers. And then one CFO actually had the Brinks truck go around and stop at the different AP specialists homes and pick up the checks that they issued that cut that day on their dining room table. And we're like you can eliminate that whole process just by kind of automating your bill payment process and payments with your suppliers. And so there are certainly some low-hanging fruits that we tried to educate the market on as well.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I'm not sure I know anybody anymore who carries a personal checkbook. We've all transitioned to automatic payments, automatic withdrawals, and we got comfortable with it personally. Why are we not comfortable with it professionally? And
absolutely.
You think about it, my head does start to explode when you think about there are unsigned or even signed checks, blank checks, sitting all over the place. Because yes, if your AP team has gone home, well, you can't get two signatures easily. So I know one CFO who signed probably 1,000 checks ahead of time.
Yep.
And my internal control heart was exploding.
Right.
Going, oh, no.
Well, hopefully they weren't a
better
public
controls. That's the thing, you really do get better controls with these software systems. You not only get better controls, you get more efficiency, it frees up your time, you can add value instead of doing routine processing.
Exactly. Well, one of the things that we've kind of learned just in kind of related fraud in business-to-business payments, over 90% of payment fraud occurs with paper check. And once you move to electronic payments, your risk of fraud really drops significantly. I was kind of chuckling. We were going back and talking about whether people are carrying a checkbook around anymore. But one of the really catalysts that we see in terms of accounts payable and payment automation adoption occurring is I call kind of the generational shift, and that is now there's millennials that are moving into leadership roles, And millennials grew up not, issuing any paper checks in their personal life, right?
They've never had a checkbook in the way that someone Gen X or older has seen. They've never used a paper check. Everything is by electronic transfer, and the other preference is on monthly payments versus annual. They like consistency. So we have to, if you want to embrace that new range of customers, you have to adapt to what they're used to. And technology is something that they love.
Well, good deal. Let's switch gears again, and let's talk about a little bit about, kind of your, kind of practice and working with and coaching, CFOs to be successful. Maybe what changes or pivots have you had to make in terms of just how you coach, CFOs that's different today than maybe before the pandemic?
Yeah, I think there really has been a switch and pressure switched from being a mile deep in your area of expertise. And previously, pre-pandemic, I would do a lot of coaching on the report preparation process, internal controls, the technical side of being a CFO. Then pandemic hits, and suddenly we have to get into skills that were not taught in your accounting degree. Yes, you learn to do financial modeling in Excel, or you may have other tools, Power BI, or software tools to do Monte Carlo analysis, the like. But that was technical. Right. Now we have to get creative and think about, it's not just what if my revenue is 10% higher or 10% lower. It's what if my revenue stream goes to zero? What do I do now? Right. Restaurant chains. And locally, I saw the difference between two restaurants. We have 3 in town. So there were 2 that were very different. One shut down and said, in New Hampshire, you're not doing outdoor dining in the middle of winter. The other one said, let me think about this from my customer's point of view. So going to the sign behind your head, think like a customer. Yeah. They said, what are my customers' pain points? And the pain point at the beginning of the pandemic was not that I want to eat out. It's that I don't want to go out at all. All right. So they said, okay, we can do takeout. And then they said, but you know what? People don't want to spend for a family of 4 going out to dinner 2 or 3 nights a week. That's not going to happen. So they shifted gears on their takeout and said, well, what if we did family-sized meals? Yeah. Big aluminum foil trays of lasagna and things like that were not normally on their menu. Right. That was a huge hit. And then they said, well, what other pain point can we solve? And they said, well, you know what? We have access to fruits and vegetables that our customers don't. So they set up an online portal for ordering fruits and veggies. And if you ordered a dinner, you could order all your fruits and veggies that you wanted and then come pick it up, and you don't, it's that contactless approach. 2 very different perspectives. Yeah. And it requires finance to say, well, what could we do differently? And what would that look like? Will it work? Versus saying, no, my model doesn't work anymore, I'm out. So I've been coaching people on creativity, on thinking about customer service. We often talk about customer service for our external customers. Finance has customers too. They're internal to the organization. And they need to start thinking about, what are my customers' problems and how can I help solve them? And that requires some business partnering skills. That's building relationships. And if you've ever read the cartoon Dilbert, the accounting department is staffed by trolls with pitchforks in the basement. People are terrified. People have had bad experiences with finance, and they bring that with them into an organization. So it's really important for finance to be the one to go explore Go reach out. Go see these department heads, the division heads, where they live. Learn about their job. One of my first roles as CFO, just one last little story. First role as CFO, one of our first meetings, I got hit with you've never been in manufacturing, you don't know what I do. And I looked at him and I said, you are 100% correct, and let's fix that. So I then spent the next week working in our manufacturing plant to really understand what they went through, what his perspective was. And while I was there, asked questions. What are your challenges? How else could I help you? And I never heard, you don't know what I do anymore.
Well, there's a lot of nuggets of wisdom in what you just said. Maybe, to wrap up today's discussion, I got two last questions. And the first is, if we put the innovation hat on and you could create or concept any new kind of technology, allow finance teams to work, smarter rather than harder, what would it be?
Oh, I think that answer is so different for every company. If I could wave a magic wand and have the perfect finance department, it would be one that was not just proactive. So we talk about reactive, which is the historical view of finance. Right. Let's look at what happened and analyze that. So if you're thinking about a ship, it's not driving looking forward, it's driving looking backwards, which doesn't help you much. So proactive is starting to use those projections to look forward. And I would say being preactive is even more important, which is design the finance department of your own future. What would that look like? And just like an organization does focus groups with their customers, finance can do focus groups with their internal customers. But absolutely, there's going to be technology and software involved. There is no reason for anybody to be using a paper check anymore. There's no reason to be filling out expense reports once a month. Those submitting of invoices and having to get them approved by sending them from person to person to person, it's a waste of time. So I think every CFO should be looking around and saying, how can I be more efficient?
Gotcha. Well, last question is, what are you most excited about for next year?
Oh, I think our transition in technology the ball has just started rolling downhill, and it's gathering steam. So I'm excited to see how much more can be done automatically and how much more time that frees up for finance to be a strategic partner throughout the organization. There's the opportunity going forward. And God willing, 2022 is a little bit calmer than 21 or 20. And we can really take advantage of those opportunities and start to see the payoff in more time to add value to the organization. It's less about control or the CF no. Now, for 2022, we have to be the CF go.
I love the CF go and enabling the CFOs become the strategic partner for their organizations. That would be a phenomenal mission for finance teams, certainly across the industry. Well said. With that, we've reached the conclusion of today's podcast. So thank you, Jennifer. Today we had Jennifer Elder, CEO of the Sustainable CFO. Thanks for spending time with us from the mountains of New Hampshire. And
thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure.
With that, we're going to sign off, and that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thanks, everybody.